Well, Bunnings is clearly the big kahuna in the hardware market, and that's happened through a steady process of growth and acquisition. It started off with just one store 30 years ago and now has hundreds of stores and billions in turnover, employs tens of thousands of people. Australians will see Bunnings in a whole lot of communities in a way that I guess in decades gone past you'd see more Mitre 10s and Knock and Kirby's and the like.
Regulatory scrutiny has been heaped on the big supermarkets recently. Why has Bunnings escaped the spotlight?
Well, when we asked former Competition Minister Craig Emerson to look at the Food and Grocery Code of Conduct, he came back with a series of recommendations, but he didn't recommend that we add hardware to that Food and Grocery Code because, as the name suggests, it's focused around the big supermarkets. So our focus has been on those big supermarkets, but we've also provided $30 million in additional funding to the competition watchdog, which allows them to look at misconduct across a whole host of sectors, which would include hardware.
As you say, Bunnings is a large player. Should there be a separate code of conduct for the hardware sector?
Look, that's not something we're contemplating at the moment, but I'll be interested to see where the Senate committee goes when it recommends. There's also opportunities for the competition watchdog to look at issues that have been raised by suppliers. So, I hear anecdotally concerns among suppliers to Bunnings about payment times, for example. These are issues that can be addressed through the unfair trading practices extension that the government's put in place. We are a friend to small business. We do want small business to get a fair deal, and codes of conduct aren't the only way we seek to achieve that. The increased penalties and the banning of unfair contract terms in our first term will be followed this term by a continued focus on competition reform, led by the Competition Task Force in Treasury.
One issue raised in the Four Corners program was why Bunnings should be able to set up next door to rivals when it stops others setting up next door to it using exclusivity clauses. Should it be allowed to do that?
Well, one of the things we've done with states and territories and their planning and zoning rules is to ensure that they're taking competition into account. That's really critical, as you know, Alicia, because it makes sure that we get the most competitive outcome for Australian consumers. We've set up a $900 million productivity fund for that work with states and territories, and among that work is the planning and zoning reforms, which go directly to the issue you've asked about.
Bunnings CEO Mike Schneider declined an interview with the Four Corners program, and Wesfarmers boss Rob Scott has pulled out of an interview with this show. Do you think it signals a deliberate strategy to sweep this competition issue under the rug?
Look, Alicia, I wouldn't expect those eminent gentlemen to be commenting on my media appearances, and so I'll do them the courtesy of not commenting on theirs. It's up to them as to how they acquit themselves before the share market and the media. Our focus is on getting a great deal for farmers, great deal for families, and that's our focus through all of those competition reforms we've got. Just in the last term of government, we had the biggest overhaul of Australia's merger laws in 50 years, modernising the merger process and putting in place laws which will allow much more careful scrutiny of anti-competitive acquisitions.
Well, both leaders shunned the Senate committee hearings into supermarket prices last year, sending mid-level managers instead while counterparts sent heavyweights. Do you think that's appropriate?
Well, again, that's up to those companies to answer for who they send along to particular inquiries. My job, as I see it, is to engage with the business community, with the Australian experts, with consumer groups in order to get the very best deal. And getting more voices into the competition conversation has been critical. We've got designated complaints now. We've seen the Consumer Action Law Centre and Choice filing their first designated complaints around door-to-door selling practices and energy bills. So we've got a livelier focus on competition than I think Australia has had in decades. And that's really important in seeing that we have a more dynamic and productive economy, a huge priority for Treasurer Chalmers and the economic team.
As you say, competition policy will be a central feature for the government this term. What is that going to look like for Bunnings?
The reforms in general, we tend to look at reforms which affect firms right across the board because the competition problem doesn't just affect one or two sectors, it really shows up in a lot of different areas. Over the last generation, Australia's seen an increase in market concentration, an increase in markups, and a fall in job switching. Productive job switching is one of the issues that we're addressing through banning non-compete clauses, a reform which will be through the Parliament within the next year and taking effect from the 1st of January 2027. We're also working with the states and territories on a revitalised national competition policy. You look back to the 1990s, the last time national competition policy really had up a head of steam, and the reforms then delivered benefits to Australian households of around $5,000 in today's terms. So there's a lot at stake from getting competition right and getting more dynamism in the economy.
A report from a Senate inquiry into big box retailing is due next week. What, if anything, are you hoping to see from that?
Well, we'll be keen to see what the recommendations are. We always engage respectfully with senators of all stripes. That's part of the competition conversation, which I think kicked off in largest part with Daniel Molino's chaired House Economics report into economic dynamism. That report laid down a series of recommendations which we've adopted through the Competition Task Force. We really are keen to implement as much competition reform as we can, because we understand that if the competition reform process stagnates, then the Australian economy can stagnate too. That decade from 2010 to 2020 was the worst decade of productivity growth in the post-war era. And I think part of the reason for that, Alicia, is that the Australian economy hasn't had that dynamism and competition that characterises a fast-growing economy. Now, you look back at who was at the top of the Australian share market in 1985, 4 out of 5 of those firms are our top 5 now, while the US stock market has seen a complete turnover at the top. More dynamism creates more opportunities for smaller firms to come up and challenge the incumbents. That's a good thing for everyone.
A lot has been written about Australia being a land of duopolies, including by yourself. Is there a risk that hardware in Australia becomes a monopoly?
It's a concern that I worry about right across the board, from banking and to baby food and beer. There is significant challenges and competition in the Australian economy, and that's one reason why I was so pleased last year when the Senate passed the merger reforms. That previously we'd had a merger regime where the competition watchdog only got to see out about 1 in 4 of the mergers that were taking place. Now we've got a regime which gives them the eyes and ears they need, which ensures that every supermarket merger is notified to the competition watchdog, which allows them to use data to look at competition hotspots or areas where there's maybe a cold spot where there's not enough competition. Regional areas, I think, have gotten the short end of the stick when it comes to competition, and there's a lot more we can do with our cities as well. So I'm really excited about the potential of this and about the opportunity for more startups to grow and thrive than we've seen in the past.
A former chair of the competition watchdog, being Alan Fells, says there's a strong case for an inquiry into the alleged anti-competitive behaviour of the hardware giant Bunnings. Treasurer Jim Chalmers says a beefed-up ACCC has the resources to investigate if it's required. Is it required?
Look, I'm a big fan of Alan's. I was just looking at his book, Tough Customer, on my bookshelf just before I walked over to do this interview with you. He's a big brain with a whole lot of sharp ideas. Our main focus in this area, though, Alicia, is to ensure that the competition watchdog is deploying its resources where it sees the biggest potential to help consumers. So that's why we've beefed up the resources they have. That's why we've beefed up their powers. That's why we've beefed up the penalties. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission has the ability to go after anti-competitive conduct wherever it sees it in the interest of Australia's consumers.
So Bunnings is not specifically in its sights at the moment?
Well, we've been pretty focused on the big supermarkets. We've had that supermarkets inquiry being handed down in March, biggest supermarkets inquiry since 2008, where the last deep dive was done. And really showing the extent to which we've got challenges both for consumers and for suppliers in that sector. That's been a specific focus for the government, as has aviation. More broadly, we've looked to ensure that the watchdog has the powers to go where it needs to go, and that we're working with states and territories on our ambitious competition agenda.
Andrew Leigh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Alicia.